Usually when we talk about building something that's meant to last for generations, like a grand cathedral or something, there's this basic expectation of a solid foundation.
Right, yeah. You need bedrock.
Exactly. You map out the bedrock, you pour the concrete, and the architects can point to the blueprints and say, this will hold the weight of everything we put on top of it.
It's grounded in physics. I mean, we like the idea that if you build something massive, the earth beneath it isn't going to just suddenly give way.
But step into the world of live service video games, and that bedrock is, well, it's essentially made of quicksand.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the ultimate example of a digital empire built on a tectonic fault line. We are charting the incredible 12-year rise, the crushing technical debt, and the quiet sunset of the most hyped video game vision in history. We're talking about Destiny.
It's just such a fascinating timeline, because it tells us so much more than just the history of a single piece of software.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the story of an entire era of the entertainment industry. I mean, we are looking at how a medium attempted to transition from selling discrete box products at retail to maintaining these living, breathing digital ecosystems, and the immense human and technological toll that transition actually demanded.
And we've got a massive stack of sources on the table to help us trace this journey for you today. We're pulling from early Kotaku investigative reports that detailed a pretty chaotic 2013 development reboot, launch reviews from IGN, midlife check-ins from PC Gamer, and we are taking this right up to the literal breaking news from yesterday, May 21st, 2026,
right,
where Bungie officially announced the end of active development for Destiny 2.
Which is still wild to say out loud.
It really is.
Our thematic through line today is tracing cause and effect. We're going to look at how a fundamentally flawed proprietary game engine combined with a dizzying carousel of corporate masters, from Microsoft to Activision, back to independent, and finally to Sony.
That's a crazy trajectory.
Yeah, how all of that inevitably collided with live service player fatigue to bring down what was supposed to be a forever game.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand how it ends, we have to grasp the sheer unprecedented scale of how it began. Let's go back to the original ambition.
Right, the early days.
Yeah. Bungie had just come off the massive industry-defining success of Halo. Their next pitch was to create this hybrid, like a cross between the incredibly tight first-person shooting of Halo and the massive multiplayer social spaces of World of Warcraft.
And that pitch landed them one of the most lucrative contracts in gaming history. Activision reportedly backed this vision with a 10-year, $500 million deal.
Wait, $500 million?
$500 million.
That is insane.
It is. And the executives, they weren't shy about their expectations at all. They were publicly quoted saying they wanted to put the Destiny universe on the exact same shelf as Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings.
Wow, no pressure, right?
Exactly. You aren't just trying to capture market share at that point. You are trying to manufacture a generational cultural touchstone completely from thin air.
But, throwing $500 million at a creative project doesn't guarantee a masterpiece. In fact, it often just magnifies the chaos behind the scenes.
Oh, always.
According to Kotaku's investigative sources, by the summer of 2013, which is, less than a year before the game was supposed to launch?
Yeah, roughly a year.
The project just hit a massive wall.
Right. This is the infamous Supercut disaster.
Tell us about that.
So, the writing team, led by Bungie veteran Joe Staten, put together a 2-hour video. It was comprised of the game's major cinematics and story beats. They presented it to the studio's senior leadership to show them, the narrative spine of the game they were about to ship.
And the plot of that supercut was wildly different from what players actually got a year later.
Yes. Right. Completely different.
It featured this massive AI warmind named Rasputin actually getting kidnapped by an alien faction called the Hive, taken to this massive dreadnought ship.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it featured Osiris, a character who, for years in the final game, was just this unseen, enigmatic lore figure as a physical Obi-Wan Kenobi-like mentor living on the planet Mercury.
It was a very traditional, linear, highly authored narrative. But project lead Jason Jones and the senior leadership watched this 2-hour presentation, and they basically rejected it outright.
Just threw it out.
Yeah. They felt it was too campy, too linear, and most importantly, they felt it fundamentally clashed with the game they were actually trying to build.
See, I have to push back on this a bit.
Okay, right.
If they had $500 million and a veteran writing team, How'd they get all the way to 2013 before leadership realizes they hate the story? Like, it's like building a mansion by gluing 5 different mobile homes together. Was it just a stylistic disagreement, or was something fundamentally broken in their communication?
I mean, it was a clash of design philosophies that happens a lot when a studio tries to invent a completely new genre. A highly authored A to B to C story works beautifully in a single-player game. You want the player to follow a specific emotional arc.
Right.
But Bungie was trying to build a shared world shooter, what they called a mythic sci-fi action game. They wanted players to feel like they were charting their own course, bouncing between planets with their friends, repeating activities, carving their own path.
So the leadership felt that locking a player into a strict 2-hour movie plot directly conflicted with the open-ended, infinite looping world they were trying to sell.
Precisely. They felt a linear story would make the open world feel small and restrictive.
Yeah.
So in an incredibly drastic move, they scrapped the entire narrative spine less than 12 months before launch.
But you can't just throw away years of incredibly expensive digital assets, right? Like voice acting, character models, cutscenes. You can't start from scratch in under a year.
No, physically impossible.
So they formed what insiders called the Iron Bar design team. Their job was to take the shattered pieces of the original story and somehow glue them together into a new, more ambiguous, open-ended plot.
Yeah.
Which birthed what developers internally referred to as a Frankenstory. That's a perfect word for it. They had to repurpose everything. A rogue-ish, Han Solo-type awoken character known as the Crow was suddenly hastily rewritten to be Prince Uldren, this snobby royal antagonist.
Oh, wow, that's a huge shift.
Right. And a robotic assistant to Osiris was completely stripped of her original context and repurposed into the enigmatic Exostranger.
And the seams where they stitched these parts together were incredibly obvious. I mean, it led to some of the most infamous, head-scratching dialogue in video game history.
Oh, absolutely.
You had the stranger delivering her legendary line, "I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain." Which, ironically, sounds exactly like a developer who just had their script deleted.
Very meta.
Or you had Peter Dinklage playing your floating robotic companion, looking at a puddle of dark water and deadpanning, "The sword is close. I can feel its power. Careful, its power is dark."
It felt hollow because the voice actors were delivering lines that were completely divorced from the context in which they were originally recorded. The overarching plot of the 2014 launch was, well, universally panned for being vague and nonsensical.
But the terrible story was really just a symptom, right? The Kotaku report goes into excruciating detail about the underlying technology Bungie built from scratch to run this game.
Yes.
And the reality is, even if they had a perfect script, they might not have been able to build it because their proprietary game engine was an absolute nightmare.
This is where we have to talk about technical debt, which is really the true engine of Destiny's eventual demise. For those outside of software development, a game engine is the suite of tools developers use to actually build the world.
Right.
It's the canvas, the paint, and the brushes. And Bungie's tools, specifically their world-building tool, were incredibly unwieldy.
The examples given in the report are just mind-boggling. They noted that if a map designer was looking at a level and they realized a small resource node, just a tiny object in the game world, needed to be moved 2 inches to the left so a player could interact with it better.
Right, a tiny change.
Making that tiny adjustment was an agonizing process.
A designer would have to initiate a process to open the map in their editor, and it would take 8 hours just to load.
Wait, 8 hours? You literally have to click open, go home, eat dinner, go to sleep, and pray it loaded correctly when you get back to the office the next morning.
Exactly. It was an overnight process just to open the file. And it gets worse. Once you finally have the map open, you move that tiny object 2 inches. Then you have to compile the map to see how that change looks in the actual game environment.
Right, translating the code.
Yeah, compiling is essentially the computer translating the designer's instructions into the final code the game uses. That process took 20 minutes.
So if I'm a designer and I move a rock and 20 minutes later I realize, oh, I moved it too far, it's clipping into a wall, I have to move it back, hit compile, and wait another 20 minutes.
Yes. And when your tools are that slow, iteration becomes impossible. Creative polishing, the act of tweaking an encounter, adjusting the timing of a script, or moving cover to make a gunfight more fun, is severely punished.
Because it just takes too much time.
Exactly. Developers are forced to just accept whatever works the first time because they physically don't have the hours in the day to refine it.
It's like trying to paint a masterpiece,
Yeah.
but every time you want to switch colors, you have to wait a week for the paint to dry.
That's a great way to put it.
You get this creative paralysis. So you have a disjointed story, and a team fighting their own technology just to put out basic updates.
Yeah.
And when the game launches in 2014, players tear through the content, and then they hit a wall.
The infamous endgame wall.
Yeah. The leveling system is punishing, the loot drops are frustrating, and player morale is plummeting.
Bungie is looking at a crisis. They built a game designed to be played endlessly, but the core loop of earning rewards is making players angry. So in December 2014, they make a fascinating organizational move.
Oh yeah, this is a great part of the story.
They call in a consultant from outside the company, Josh Mosquera, the director of Diablo 3.
Which, contextually, is a brilliant historical parallel. Diablo 3 launched a few years prior with massive hype, suffered a terrible launch, and had a deeply flawed loot system that players hated.
Right.
But Mosquera and his team managed to completely overhaul the game and save it. So Bungie brings him in to essentially diagnose Destiny.
Mosquera sat down with Bungie's leadership and gave them a masterclass in the psychology of the loot grind. The fundamental problem Destiny had was relying on pure, unweighted randomness.
Right, if an enemy drops a piece of armor, the game was just rolling a digital 20-sided die.
And the issue with pure probability is that it doesn't care about human feelings. If you flip a coin, it might land on tails 10 times in a row. Statistically, it's totally normal. Psychologically, it feels like the universe is punishing you.
For sure.
This is adjacent to the gambler's fallacy. The human brain expects patterns and fairness where none exist. In early Destiny, a player could grind a difficult raid for 10 hours and receive nothing but a pair of digital boots they already own, while their friend played for 20 minutes and got the rarest weapon in the game.
And that friend is probably gloating in the voice chat, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Mosquera pointed out that pure randomness is actually terrible game design. He told them you have to give players the illusion of randomness, but behind the scenes, the game has to be secretly stacking the deck in the player's favor.
Okay, so cheating a little bit for the player.
Exactly. If the game notices you haven't received a good drop in a while, it needs to invisibly boost your odds. He established a core philosophy for live service games. When a player logs off for the night, they need to leave the game happy.
Makes sense.
If they leave frustrated because the random number generator punished them, they might never log back in.
So Bungie took that psychology to heart. They overhauled the loot system, they introduced ways to predictably earn gear, and they significantly improved the pacing. And it worked. By the time they launched the full sequel, Destiny 2, in 2017, they had seemingly mastered this loop.
They really have.
The IGN review of Destiny 2's launch was glowing.
It was a massive critical success. IGN praised the new central villain, Dominus Ghaul, noting that unlike the vague threats of the first game, Ghaul actually had a coherent, understandable motive. They lauded the Leviathan raid, which was this opulent game show-like puzzle box in space, and the competitive multiplayer modes.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because inside that incredibly polished 2017 launch, the seeds of their next massive crisis were quietly planted. Destiny 2 introduced a system called Eververse Bright Engrams.
Yeah, the turning point. For those unfamiliar with the terminology, an engram in Destiny is basically a digital loot box, and the Bright Engrams were premium loot boxes.
Right. And alongside these, they introduced single-use shaders. Let's explain shaders for a second. In the first game, if you found a specific color dye, say a cool matte black, you could apply it to all your armor infinitely for free.
Oh, yep.
In Destiny 2, they made those colors consumable. You had to use them up, and if you wanted more, you were heavily incentivized to spend real-world money in the Eververse store to buy these premium loot boxes to maybe get the color you wanted.
It was incredibly controversial. Players felt nickel and dimed. But if we look at the economics driving the studio, those microtransactions weren't just simple corporate greed. They were an absolute necessity for survival.
Because of the engine.
Exactly. We have to connect the financial model back to the technical debt. Bungie is running a live service game. Players are consuming a narrative campaign that took 2 years to build in, like a single weekend.
Right, they burned through it.
And then they instantly demand more content. But Bungie's proprietary engine is still agonizingly slow, so they have to hire massive teams of developers, throwing sheer manpower at a broken toolset just to keep the content pipeline flowing.
So they are trapped on a treadmill. They need a constant stream of revenue to pay the massive staff required to wrestle with their terrible engine, just to put out enough content to keep players around to buy more microtransactions. It is a completely unsustainable loop.
Which brings a physical consequence to the forefront. When you are forced to constantly add new content to a game without the underlying architecture to support it efficiently, You run into the limits of infinite growth.
And that leads us right into the summer of 2020. Bungie releases a developer update that reads less like a patch note and more like a distress signal.
Yeah, that was a huge moment.
By year 3 of Destiny 2, the game had ballooned to a 115 gigabyte install size, and they admitted it was growing by roughly 25 gigabytes every single year.
We have to contextualize what that means for both the player and the developer. For a player on a standard console, a single game taking up 150 gigabytes means they're eventually going to have to delete other games just to install an update.
Which players hate doing.
Exactly. But for the developer, it's catastrophic.
They explained that the sheer mass of the game's code was breaking their ability to maintain it. When an engineer tried to generate a patch to fix a bug, it took literal days for the computers to process it.
Days.
The game was so large that their quality assurance testers couldn't possibly check every corner of the universe. Bugs were slipping into the live game constantly, leading to the first ever server rollbacks, where the game broke so badly they had to rewind time, and players actually lost their hard-earned progress.
They shared a fascinating piece of data to illustrate the inefficiency. They pointed out an older expansion called Warmind. The files for the Warmind campaign and its patrol zones took up a massive 5% of the game's total install size. But when they looked at their internal metrics, players were only spending 0.3% of their total playtime in those areas.
Wow. So you have a massive chunk of your game engine's processing power and your testers' time being dedicated to a dusty corner of the universe that nobody's even visiting.
It's terrible resource management. But because the game is one interconnected web, every time they added a new gun to the game, they had to make sure it didn't accidentally break a wall in that old Warmind content. The technical debt had grown so large it was threatening to bankrupt their development bandwidth entirely.
Normally, the industry solution to this is to just make a sequel. You leave the bloated mess behind and launch Destiny 3. But Bungie stated they didn't want to do that, because making players abandon all their characters and loot to start over in a new game fractures the community.
Right.
So they introduced a solution that is still debated today, the DCV, the Destiny Content Vault.
A highly controversial, arguably unprecedented move in modern console gaming. To make room on the hard drive for new expansions, Bungie decided to simply amputate massive chunks of the existing game.
They vaulted entire planets. Mars, Io, Titan, Mercury gone, the massive Leviathan raid gone. And eventually, they deleted the original Red War launch campaign and the universally praised Forsaken campaign. They just erased them from the active servers.
The psychological impact this had on the consumer base cannot be overstated. We aren't talking about a multiplayer shooter rotating out a few maps for a season.
Right.
Players lost access to sprawling, cinematic, narrative campaigns that they had paid actual, real-world money for.
See, I really have to push back on the logic of this from a consumer standpoint. Wait, so they deleted the first chapters of the book while you're still reading it?
Basically, yeah.
If I bought the box in 2017 and I want to replay that story in 2021, I just can't. From the outside looking in, isn't that just a massive corporation masking their own technical failures by punishing the people who paid them? Sorry, our engine is broken and our file size is too big, so we're going to confiscate your property.
It is entirely fair to view it that way, and a massive portion of the community felt deeply betrayed. It challenged the fundamental notion of digital ownership. If you buy a digital license for a live service game, what do you actually own?
Right. Do you own anything?
But if we look at it from Bungie's perspective, based on the engineering realities they outlined, it wasn't malice, it was an existential triage.
Like cutting off a limb to save the patient.
Exactly. If they didn't amputate those older, bloated sections of the game, the entire body of Destiny 2 was going to collapse. The servers would become unstable, patches would cease, and the game would literally start functioning. They chose an awful anti-consumer solution because the only alternative was death.
But the collateral damage was severe. As a PC Gamer review pointed out later, this amputated game created a laughably bad new player experience. If you were a new player who downloaded Destiny 2 after 2020, you were essentially dropped into the middle of a 10-year television show in Season 5.
So disorienting.
You had no idea who anyone was, why you were fighting, or what was happening, because the prologue and the first 4 seasons had been literally erased from existence.
It severely damaged their ability to attract new players, which is the lifeblood of a live service economy. And all of this intense technical and community pressure is happening against the backdrop of one of the most chaotic corporate histories in modern entertainment.
Yes, The corporate shuffle.
Hmm.
Let's actually trace this, because the sheer amount of whiplash that developers must have felt is staggering. In the year 2000, Bungie was acquired by Microsoft to make Halo.
Okay.
In 2007, they bought their independence back. In the 2010s, they signed that massive 10-year publishing deal with Activision to make Destiny. By 2019, they split from Activision, paying millions to retain the rights to the franchise and become independent again. And then, in 2022, they were acquired by Sony PlayStation.
You cannot understate how disruptive that is to a company's culture. Every time you change corporate masters, the financial expectations, the strategic direction, and the internal metrics for success are completely rewritten.
Right.
Activision demanded a strict cadence of major boxed releases to please shareholders. When Bungie went independent, they had to figure out how to self-publish and fund themselves purely through microtransactions and digital expansions. When Sony acquired them, Sony wanted Bungie's expertise to help launch a dozen different live service games across PlayStation.
So Bungie's leadership is constantly trying to appease different billionaires, while their developers are fighting an archaic engine, while the players are furious about deleted content. When you combine all those pressures, it completely explains why the quality of the game fluctuated so wildly from year to year.
The variance in quality was immense. Look at the high as 2022. They released the Witch Queen expansion, which PC Gamer heralded as a massive step forward. It wasn't just a good story, it fundamentally evolved the mechanics.
That expansion introduced a legendary difficulty mode for the campaign. For years, the story missions in Destiny were essentially a walking simulator where you instantly vaporized every alien in your path.
Right, zero challenge.
Legendary mode forced players to actually think tactically, use cover, and coordinate with their friends.
They also rolled out the Void 3.0 ability rework. For the non-gamers listening, this essentially means they took the player's magical space powers, specifically the gravity-based void powers, and completely overhauled the underlying code to allow for incredibly deep RPG-style customization. You could finally tailor your character to your exact playstyle.
And they gave us the Lucent Hive. This was brilliant design. For 8 years, the players were the only ones with these immortal superpowers. The Lucent Hive were enemies that were blessed with the exact same powers as the player.
It changed everything.
You're fighting an alien, and suddenly it throws your own super move right back in your face, and if you don't crush its ghost, it resurrects. It was a high watermark for the series.
But the reality of the live service treadmill is that you don't get to rest on your laurels. A year later, in 2023, they had to release the next annual expansion, Lightfall, and it was widely criticized as a severe quality miss.
It was jarring. The narrative tone suddenly shifted to this neon 80s action movie vibe that felt completely disconnected from the serious, impending doom they had been building up. Characters were cracking jokes while the universe was ending. The community completely rejected it.
And in the modern gaming industry, you simply cannot afford a massive quality miss on an annual expansion. The margins are too thin. If players don't like the expansion, they don't play. If they don't play, they don't buy microtransactions. If they don't buy microtransactions, the studio can't make payroll.
Which brings us to the financial collapse of the studio. In late 2023, Bungie was forced to lay off 8% of its workforce. And then the following year in 2024, they instituted a massive, devastating round of cuts, laying off a staggering 17% of their remaining staff.
Former CEO Pete Parsons released a very sobering public statement. He didn't hide behind PR spin. He pointed directly to the economic reality. He cited a broad economic slowdown, a sharp downturn in the games industry, and most tellingly, he admitted that Destiny was running 45% below their revenue projections.
He explicitly said, "We began running in the red." A studio that was acquired by Sony for $3.6 billion 2 years prior was suddenly bleeding cash.
It highlights the extreme hubris of their business model at the time. They were trying to incubate a massive new franchise, a game called Marathon, while still trying to maintain an impossibly expensive live service game that was bleeding players due to a bad expansion.
Yeah.
They overextended, and the developers paid the price with their jobs.
Amidst all of this turmoil, the sheer panic of layoffs and revenue misses, the remaining team somehow manages to push out the final shape in June 2024. And this expansion was monumental. It was the definitive culmination of the 10-year Light and Darkness saga. The Guardians finally confront and defeat the ultimate forces of darkness. The story that began a decade prior in 2014 was actually given a definitive conclusion.
It was a massive narrative achievement, but defeating the darkness was only the spiritual end of the game. It provided emotional closure for the community. The operational, real-world end of Destiny 2, the mechanics of how you actually shut down a massive live service economy, took 2 more years to unfold.
Which brings us to the second half of this incredible timeline. We are moving into the post-final shape era, leading directly to the breaking news from yesterday. Let's look at the period between 2024 and 2025. You'd think releasing a beloved finale would boost morale, but according to IGN sources, the mood inside Bungie was completely rancid.
The studio was hollowed out. They had just lost veterans who had been defining the culture of the company for over 20 years. One source told IGN, "No one is safe."
Wow.
There was a palpable fear that Sony, frustrated with the financial losses, was going to enact a clause in their contract to completely strip Bungie's board of independence and orchestrate a total corporate takeover.
The pressure culminated at the top. Pete Parsons, the CEO who guided them through the Activision split and the Sony acquisition, stepped down in 2025. And structurally, the studio's focus was aggressively pivoting away from Destiny and toward Marathon.
We should define what Marathon is because it explains the pivot. Marathon is an extraction shooter. This is a very specific modern genre where players drop into a map, grab loot, and try to escape before they are killed by other players.
So it's heavily replayable.
Exactly. Unlike Destiny, which requires massive, handcrafted story campaigns, an extraction shooter relies on emergent, player-driven gameplay. It is exponentially cheaper to maintain once it's launched.
It's the new golden goose. But Marathon had its own incredibly troubled development, suffering multiple delays before finally launching and entering its second season here in June 2026. But all those resources shifting to the new game meant Destiny was slowly being starved. The writing was on the wall for 2 years.
And yesterday, May 21st, 2026, the hammer finally fell. Bungie published a blog post titled, "Every End is a New Beginning," and they stated plainly, without any ambiguity. After the final shape, we have reached the time for our shared worlds and Destiny to live beyond Destiny 2. Active development is ending. June 9, 2026 will mark the final live service content update for the game.
I mean, this is a seismic shift for the industry. For a decade, Destiny was the white whale. Every single major publisher, EA with Anthem, Square Enix with Outriders, tried and failed to copy this formula. Destiny proved that a console shooter could actually sustain a massively multiplayer ecosystem.
Yeah.
And now it's just stopping.
It's the end of an era.
So what does this actually mean for the players who have spent 12 years treating this game like a second job? Do they log in on June 10th and get a 404 error?
No, and this is where Bungie's strategy is actually quite fascinating from a preservation standpoint. They aren't unplugging the servers, they are transitioning the game into what the industry calls maintenance mode, but they are attempting to do it gracefully, rolling out a massive final update called Monument of Triumph, which is designed to seal the game in its absolute best, most rewarding state.
Let's really deconstruct this June 9th final update, because they aren't just walking away, they are fundamentally changing how the game operates. First, they are addressing a decade of UI complaints by bringing back the classic director interface. They're restoring the map and the center of activities to its original familiar layout.
They are also restructuring the endgame. They are introducing Pantheon 2.0. The original Pantheon was a beloved limited-time event where players faced a gauntlet of raid bosses. Now it's becoming a permanent fixture.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, they are rolling it out in deliberate phases. June 9th brings the first slate of bosses, June 13th unlocks the full gauntlet, and June 16th introduces weekly encounter rotations. It ensures that the hardcore PvE players will eternally have a pinnacle challenge to test themselves against, even without new content.
But the sandbox changes. The actual abilities the players use are wild. They're introducing brand new powers right as they walk out the door. A crackshot aspect for Solar Hunters, a Soul Siphon ability for Void Warlocks, and a Shield Burst for Solar Titans. Plus, every class gets access to these new Strand Slice Wire and Stasis Shatter grenades.
We have to look at the philosophy behind adding these specific, incredibly powerful tools at the very end of a game's life cycle. It relates to a concept in game design called power creep.
Right, explain power creep for the listeners.
In a living game, if a developer introduces a gun that is 10% stronger than everything else, everyone uses that gun. To make the next expansion exciting, the developer has to introduce enemies that are 10% tougher, and then a new gun that is 20% stronger. Over 5 years, the numbers spiral out of control, making older content trivial and breaking the game's balance. Live service developers spend half their time aggressively nerfing or weakening player abilities to prevent power creep from ruining future expansions.
Yeah. So because there are no future expansions.
Exactly. Because active development is ending, the developers are completely freed from the anxiety of tower creep. They no longer have to worry about how a Soul Siphon Warlock ability is going to break a raid 2 years from now because there are no more raids. They can afford to give the players the keys to the castle, let them become ridiculously overpowered, and just let them have fun.
Which perfectly explains the massive loot and quality of life updates they are pushing in this final patch. All raid and dungeon gear is getting Tier 1 through 5 crafting upgrades. Any exotic armor you've earned since the Edge of Fate expansion will automatically upgrade to max Tier 5 stats. They're just handing out the best gear in the game. But the absolute biggest mic drop for the hardcore community. True exotic armor transmog is finally being introduced for PvE environments.
This is a huge deal for the culture of the game.
Yeah.
For non-gamers, transmog or transmogrification is essentially a holographic disguise for your clothing.
Let me try an analogy here. Imagine you live in a freezing climate and you own this terribly ugly neon orange puffy winter coat. But it is the warmest, most mechanically effective coat you own. Transmog lets you wear that ugly coat for the warmth, but project a hologram over it so to everyone else it looks like a sleek tailored leather jacket.
Perfect analogy. In Destiny, exotic armor pieces offer the best mechanical perks, but they often look bizarre and ruin a player's carefully curated, customized outfit. Because fashion is the true endgame for MMO players, they have begged for the ability to use transmog on exotic armor for a decade. Bungie always restricted it for competitive visibility reasons. Now, as a final parting gift, they are lifting that restriction in PvE.
It's a massive crowd pleaser. But while they're giving all these gifts, this update also marks the definitive, undeniable end of the live service treadmill. They announced that all seasonal events, the Halloween-themed Festival of the Lost, the Winter Dawning, the Spring Guardian Games, they are all permanently retired.
All of the cosmetics and weapons that were tied to those time-limited FOMO-inducing events are simply being moved to a static Monument of Triumph vendor in the Games Hub. And all the disparate, confusingly priced DLCs from the past decade are being bundled into a single static purchase called the Collection.
It's the ultimate concession that the living, breathing world is entering stasis. There will be no more evolving narratives told over months, no more secrets waiting to be discovered at the Tuesday weekly reset. The game is becoming a closed loop. It sounds exactly like they are taking a living, breathing theme park that required constant daily construction and massive teams of engineers just to keep people interested, and they are sealing it in amber to become a museum. You can still buy a ticket, you can still ride all the roller coasters, but no one is ever going to build a new ride.
That is exactly what maintenance mode is. The museum is open, but the curators have gone home. And as they seal this museum in amber, they are adding one final exhibit, something the community has been demanding since the very first year of the franchise. It is the ultimate piece of fan service.
The Sparrow Racing League. SRL is returning as a permanent addition to the game.
For context, Sparrows are the hoverbikes players use to traverse the planets. Early in the franchise's history, Bungie introduced a limited-time event where players could literally race them on dedicated tracks.
And people obsessed over it. But Bungie historically claimed that maintaining the physics and the unique loot for SRL was far too resource-intensive to justify keeping it around alongside the core shooting game.
But now, in this June 9th update, they are bringing back the old tracks from the original Destiny. They are adding a brand new space specifically designed to race in, and they are including unique cosmetic weapons, armor, and those hilarious custom horns for the hoverbikes.
Beep, beep.
Exactly. If we look at this purely from a community management perspective, bringing back SRL is Bungie's ultimate love letter, and perhaps a tacit apology to a fan base they put through the ringer. It's a feature they couldn't afford to support when they were worried about the next 10 years, but they found a way to immortalize it as they closed the door.
It carries such a heavy emotional weight. I was reading a brilliant piece in Aftermath by journalist Gita Jackson covering this final announcement, and her perspective really grounds this whole 12-year timeline in human reality. She talks about how, despite the rocky history, the deleted content, the frustrating corporate layoffs, the fact that a live service game lasted for over 10 years is, frankly, A miracle.
It truly is a statistical anomaly. Look at the modern gaming landscape. We see massive, hundreds of millions of dollars live service games launch like Concord recently, and they literally die and shut down their servers within weeks because they can't capture an audience. To hold the cultural attention of millions of people for a decade is an incredibly rare feat of human engineering and artistry.
Jackson wrote beautifully about how this game literally wove itself into the fabric of her actual life. Destiny was how she kept up with friends who moved across the country. It was how she decompressed and got through dark periods in her personal life. She pointed out that beneath all the convoluted space magic jargon and the messy lore, the fundamental story of Destiny was incredibly simple. It was about the victory of light over dark. It was a game about being someone who never gives up hope, even when you are completely surrounded by darkness.
And it is impossible not to see how that narrative sentiment mirrors the journey of the studio itself. For 12 years, Bungie constantly fought against their own technological darkness, an engine that fought them at every turn. They fought against financial constraints and corporate mandates. They were constantly trying to find the light, trying to deliver on that original $500 million promise they made all the way back in 2013.
So, what a 12-year journey it has been. From a wildly ambitious pipe dream burdened by a terrible engine that required 8 hours to load a map, to a literal masterclass in first-person gunplay and loop psychology, to a sobering cautionary tale about the absolute limits of human output, corporate acquisitions, and hard drive space. And now, as of June 9th, Destiny 2 is finally resting in peace, sealed perfectly in its monument of triumph.
Which leaves us with a profound question as the entertainment industry moves forward. Destiny survived for over a decade by demanding that its players treat the software not just as a game, but as a lifestyle. But as the industry seemingly shifts away from the forever game model, moving toward smaller, cheaper extraction shooters and self-contained experiences, we have to ask, was Destiny a beautiful, unrepeatable anomaly? Or did its relentless, engine-breaking, developer-burning grind ensure that a game of this sheer scale and ambition will simply never be attempted again?
It's a heavy thought to mull over the next time you boot up any piece of media that promises you an infinite world. Because as we've seen today, even the most beautiful, sprawling cathedrals eventually stop being built. And at some point, you just have to step back and appreciate the foundation that remains. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Take care and keep exploring.